I found her in the ash field, 40 meters past the perimeter wire, lying face down in the gray crust like something that had fallen from a great height and simply stopped. I was running the morning exterior check, Survey Station Careth 9, Plateau 11, the dead volcanic shelf above the Dreth lowlands. 6 of us staffing it, geologists mostly. I was the medical officer, which on a station this remote meant. I was also the cook, the counselor, person who got called at 3 in the morning when Davin thought his knee was infected again. It was not glamorous work. It was steady work, and I had long since decided that steady was what I wanted. She was Keth. I knew that much from the coloring, that warm copper-brown skin threaded through with pale silicate lines, a species cue as distinctive as a fingerprint. I had treated one Keth adult in my career, a survey contractor with a cracked rib, who had been the quietest patient I'd ever had. He'd communicated entirely in looks. I remembered thinking there was a whole language in there I didn't have the vocabulary for. The child was smaller than anything I'd expected to find alive out in the ash field. I crouched beside her and put 2 fingers to the side of her neck, and she rolled away from my hand. Not a flinch, exactly. More like the instinct of a creature that had learned to move away from contact before it fully woke. Her eyes opened, amber, wide, pupils tracking me with an alertness that didn't match the rest of her condition. She was thin, worn. She looked at me the way a person looks at something they're trying to decide is a threat. I sat back on my heels very slowly, and I kept my hands where she could see them. She looked at my hands for a long time. Then she looked at my face. Then she sat up. That was how it started. I brought her inside. I logged her arrival station manifest under my own name, Vance, Sarah, Medical, because the form had a field for dependents, and I filled it in without thinking much about it, which is the only honest account I can give you of that moment. I gave her the back room off the med bay, the one with the second bunk I'd been using as storage. I moved the boxes. I made the bunk. She watched me do all of it from the doorway. When I brought her a tin of broth and set it on the floor because there was no table, she looked at it, then at me, then picked it up and held it in both hands without drinking. Just held it. Like the holding was the point. I left her to it and went to tell the team. Davin and Osh took the news with the easy pragmatism of people who have worked remote postings long, enough to know that strange things turn up. Gerville made a sound that might have been a complaint, or might have been an acknowledgement. With Gerville, it was always hard to tell. Merrick said nothing. Torek said nothing. I noticed that Merrick and Torek said nothing in exactly the same way, which I filed away without yet knowing what to do with it. By the second day I knew something was wrong. It was small things. The way Merrick ate, which was normally enthusiastic to the point of embarrassment, had become careful, precise, joyless. The way Torek moved. Torek, who had a bad hip he complained about daily, moved without any trace of that hitching quality I'd watched for 8 months. Both of them had the habit of turning toward each other before they spoke, a fraction of a second, like checking a signal. I am a medical officer. I know bodies. I know how people inhabit themselves. The signature of a gait, the architecture of a familiar gesture. Merrick was not inhabiting his body the way Merrick inhabited his body. Torek was not inhabiting his body the way Torek inhabited his body. I had heard of the skein. Most frontier medics had, the way you hear of something rare enough to be almost myth. Parasitic consciousness, not biological in any frame we had a good word for, that could occupy a host and run it well enough to pass. If it was careful, and the observer wasn't paying attention. They were hunters. They had been absent from this sector for 11 years. The child knew. That was the other thing I worked out on the second day. She would not leave my side. Not because she was clinging, not because she was desperate. She wasn't either of those things. She was too collected, too watchful. She stayed close to me, specifically, because she was tracking Merrick and Torek the same way I was, and she had understood what they were before I did. I told Davin and Osh quietly in the generator room, with the noise up. I told them to stay in pairs and not to eat or drink anything they hadn't paired themselves, and I watched their faces for the fraction of a second turn toward each other that Merrick and Torek had. Neither of them did it. That was enough. I told them what I was going to do. There is a quarantine protocol for potential biological contamination on remote survey stations. I had written the protocol for Kareth 9 myself, 18 months ago, on a slow week. It locked down compartments by sector. It sealed the external airlocks. It required medical authorization for any override, and the medical officer's authorization code was mine. I ran the protocol at 0400 on the third morning. When I was certain Marek and Torek were both in the main corridor, the lights went red, the doors went hard locked. I heard the airlock seals engage, all 6 of them, one after another like the station exhaling. Then I heard Marek's voice from the corridor, and it was not Marek's voice. It was Marek's voice with something underneath it that Marek had never put there. A flat, tuned quality, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. He said my name, then he said the child's name. He said it the say you say a word in a language you learned phonetically, without understanding what it means. The syllables correct and entirely hollow. I had the child behind me. I had my back to the medbay door. I had the station's internal chemical suppression system on a manual trigger in my right hand. A fire suppressant compound that, at the concentration the station carried it, would not kill a human host, but would force a Skyn occupant out of the body within 40 seconds. I had confirmed this in the records at 0200. The 40 seconds were not pleasant for anyone. I want to be clear about that. I am not the kind of person who tells you it was clean or easy or without cost. It was none of those things. What it was over. Devan and Osh had the medical team from the Dreth Lowland relay station on the channel before the suppression compound had finished cycling through the vents. I had the 2 Skyn contained. The occupied hosts alive, both of them, Marek and Torek themselves, still present somewhere underneath, dazed and sick, and going to have a very bad week, but alive. And the Skyn consciousness is separated and in a sealed compartment that would hold them long enough for a proper response team to arrive. The child sat on the bunk in the back room. She had not moved. She had not made a sound through any of it. When I came in and sat on the edge of the bunk beside her and put my hands on my knees and let out a breath that had been waiting about 3 hours to leave my body, she looked at me the way she had looked at me in the ash field, trying to determine what I was. I picked up the tin of broth I'd brought the night before, the one she hadn't touched. I held it out to her. She took it. She drank from it this time, in slow and careful swallows, watching me over the rim. I sat with her until the relay team's ship registered on the approach sensors. 41 minutes. We didn't speak. She didn't have the language, and I didn't have hers. But she stayed close enough that her shoulder was against my arm for most of it, and I didn't move away. The warmth of her was the warmth of something alive that had been hunted to the edge and was still here anyway. The relay team's lead officer asked me when he arrived what I wanted done with her. He said it with the careful bureaucratic neutrality of someone who has a lot of forms and not much time. I told him she was listed on the station manifest under my name. He checked his tablet. He looked up. He didn't argue. I don't have a large life. I have a station on a volcanic plateau, a med bay with inadequate supplies, and a crew that now numbers 4, with a 5th who communicates entirely in looks, and has recently learned to accept broth. She started teaching me her language on the 4th day. I am a slow student. She is patient in the way that children are patient when they have decided, for whatever reasons of their own, that you are worth the effort. I think about the Skeens sometimes, 2 of them sealed in their containment unit, waiting for the response team's ship. I think about what they wanted with her, and the records say they hunt specific prey, but don't say why. I don't need to know why. I only needed to know that they came here, and that I was already here first.